So, hello everybody, and welcome to a flying Google Hangout to meet pioneers. I'm Jason Paur, and I cover aerospace at Wired Magazine and Wired.com. Today I'm joined by an amazing group of pioneers from several diverse fields, but we all have one shared thing in common for the past 2 months. We've all been watching the Solar Impulse team as they've been flying across America in their solar-powered HBSIA from San Francisco to New York. Joining us today in this hangout are director James Cameron, who has two big passions, filmmaking and diving. His films include The Terminator, Titanic, and Avatar. And after several deep-sea submersible trips to the bottom of the ocean to see Titanic, he founded the Earthship Productions to make documentary films about ocean exploration and conservation. And he has since made numerous trips to the deep ocean, including to the bottom of the deepest part of the ocean, to the Mariana Trench. Erik Lindbergh is a pilot, artist, and entrepreneur with a family history of pioneering flights. His grandfather, Charles Lindbergh, was the first to fly solo across the Atlantic back in 1927. And actually, Erik traced that flight when he flew solo across the Atlantic in 2002. Today, he's a passionate advocate for electric aircraft, having recently flown a small electric airplane for the first time himself. We're also joined by ELEW, who's a modern-day pop artist and music revolutionary. He's a rock jazz pianist who has toured the world playing his unique blend of music and piano showmanship. The musical pioneer, he's also a very passionate fan of technology who's been following the Solar Impulse project for the past few months. And Greg Topkin joins us. He's a graduate student at Cornell University studying technology. And I guess Greg is part of the next generation of pioneers we all expect to rely on in the future. So no pressure, Greg. And of course, we're joined by Solar Impulse co-founders and pilots André Borschberg, who is live in the cockpit, although he is temporarily busy talking to air traffic control, as well as co-founder and pilot Bertrand Piccard, who is joining us from New York. So perhaps, Bertrand, you could say hello and just give us a quick introduction of where things sit right now with Solar Impulse.
Yes, hello to everybody, and especially to my friends, James Cameron and Erik Lindbergh, who are patrons and friends of the Solar Impulse project. Well, we had this dream of flying with a solar-powered airplane, day and night, with no fuel. We did it above Switzerland, above Europe, above Africa, and the next step was, of course, to do it over America, because America is the land of pioneers, where aviation was born, and to fly coast to coast is mythical with every airplane. And imagine with an airplane just on solar power. So it's the last big rehearsal before the flight around the world that we want to do in 2015.
And that next flight has already begun, is that right, in Switzerland? Some of the work is already beginning on that new airplane?
Yes, we have the second airplane in construction, and André Borschberg and I, we plan to fly with it for test flying next year, and in 2015 around the world. But you know, before we go around the world, we just have to finish the dream that we launched a couple of months ago. André is now flying in the Solar Impulse above the Atlantic Ocean, coming to New York. And this evening he will enter into the Hudson Bay, south of Manhattan, to fly above the Statue of Liberty, which is an iconic place in the world, before landing in Kennedy Airport.
André, are you able to join us? Can you hear us right now? Perhaps we'll come back to André in a minute. One of the big themes, Bertrand, you have talked about is the pioneering spirit and the pioneering history that your family has had, as well as your previous flights and the Solar Impulse project. And many of the people joining us here are also pioneers. Obviously, Mr. Cameron, we all know you from your movies, but lately you've been showing a great interest in the deep oceans. Can you talk a little bit about the pioneering trip you recently made to the Mariana Trench?
Well, sure. I've actually been doing deep ocean exploration for 17 years, kind of in the background of my film work. And recently, I made a dive to a place very close to where Bertrand Piccard's father, Jacques Piccard, made his famous dive in 1960. He dove in the with Don Walsh in the west basin of the Challenger Deep, which is the deepest area of the Mariana Trench, and I dove in the east basin, which was about 34 miles away, and we reached approximately the same depth, give or take, 10 meters or so, based on the accuracy of our instruments. And so we know pretty well that this is the deepest spot on the planet. I think that pioneering means a lot of different things to different people, but in the case of solar impulse, I think what's being captured here is not only is it new technology and demonstrating a way and opening a door, but it's about personal risk. I mean, when you fly in an experimental prototypical aircraft, there's personal risk involved, and I think that what that demonstrates is a willingness for people to put their own selves on the line to make a point, to establish a principle. And this is something that Bertrand did. It's something that's in his family genes. His grandfather Auguste risked his life and almost died several times in some of his ultra high altitude ballooning experiments early on. His father Jacques had a number of white knuckle dives to the deepest places in the planet. And so, I think we have to stand for something, and what the solar impulse stands for is renewable energy, not just electric aircraft, but the use of solar power in general. And this is something that's going to be fundamental and critical to the survival of the human race. So you've got people that are out there, standing for something, committing themselves, putting their personal asses on the line to make a point for the betterment of human civilization, and I greatly applaud that, both yourself, Bertrand, and André, for what you've done so far and what you're going to do in the future.
Definitely a case where it does seem that personal risk is often what brings the big rewards, not only for an individual but for society as a whole.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I think Bertrand and André are. First of all, they've risked their time, their capital, their personal reputations, and they're also taking the physical risk of flying in an experimental aircraft. And I think we all have to respect and acknowledge that. And the value of it is for the greater good of society.
Erik Lindbergh, personal risk and big adventure is something that runs deep in your family. And you're also now involved with electric aircraft as well as other sort of pioneering aspects of technology. Can you talk a little bit about that same idea of what it takes to create those new ideas and create new technologies?
Sure. You mentioned my flight across the Atlantic in 2002, celebrating my grandfather's flight 75 years after he made that. And it really was to help promote the future, and by that I mean X Prize. Using a prize, just like grandfather was incentivized to use a prize to fly across the Atlantic, and that prize shifted the world's perspective on what aviation could be used for, commercial purposes. And now we have sort of a new space industry taking off. And what that has led to in my life recently is electric aircraft, and I went to a forum at Oshkosh Air Venture to hear people talk about electric aircraft, and ever since then I've wanted to fly one. And since I'm not an engineer, I thought, well, how do I push this? How do we make that a reality? Because quiet, clean, safe, renewable energy propulsion for aircraft will shift the way we move around the planet. And I think everything that we can do in our power to make that happen is critically important. And my brothers, I don't want to ramble on, but my brothers in electric flight, Bertrand and André, are giving us that message. This technology is at our fingertips, and we can realize it. We just have to push. So just hats off to you guys, and I think the gauntlet has been laid. The next adventures that we need to take need to develop this future, a brilliant future for mankind.
We're also joined today by ELEW, who at first glance might seem that he's a bit outside, but ELEW in his own right is a very a pioneering musician who has created his own unique style of rock jazz, and I think it sort of gives a broader perspective that sometimes we get lost in focusing on maybe the technology and the airplanes here. But ELEW, can you talk a little bit about pioneering in your world and in your particular field?
Well, I find that this type of talk about the mechanics is very stimulating because a piano, a turntable, any of these things, they're all based upon mechanics. And the human spirit just seeks to find freedom in so many different ways. And so to see these guys flying around the world and flying, in this way, and something that they built, it's very similar to what I experienced when I hit the stage and I'm using my hands to fly, basically, or I'm using a turntable, or I'm using a voice to fly. So it's very like Icarus or Daedalus, it's very mythological. And then what Mr. Cameron was saying about putting oneself at risk, the absolutism that comes with innovation or trying to pioneer something. You have to overcome all of your emotions. You have to overcome perhaps resistance from the outside, critics, or in the case of these gentlemen, they're flying in something that they're trusting with their lives in a hostile environment. So it's just an amazing thing, and there's many parallels that I can connect to and feel inspired by. When I hit the stage, it's a very absolute environment. So artistically, I see many parallels and feel very connected.
It really shows us that many of these same thoughts go beyond where we would normally think they exist. Can we find out, is André available? André, can you hear us? So it still sounds like we are without André. Perhaps, Bertrand, you could talk a little bit about the final flight here, this leg from Washington, D.C. to New York, or maybe just talk about one of the legs that you've flown, and how has it been flying Solar Impulse across America? I think a lot of people don't understand that it's a patience testing flight. You're flying along at somewhere between maybe 30 and 40 miles an hour much of the time, but entirely powered by the sun. Is that right?
Yes, this is absolutely true. Maybe I will just answer to the notion of risk that was raised by James Cameron and Erik Lindbergh. I believe that the biggest risk is not to fly in a solar airplane or to dive in a submarine or to do whatever. I think the biggest risk is to live in a world that is depleting all the natural resources, that is polluting the planet, that is burning 1 million tons of oil every hour without even counting gas and coal. This is a terrible risk, and we're not allowed to do that. So Solar Impulse is reacting to show clean technologies, to show other solutions, exactly like James Cameron and Erik Lindbergh are reacting also in their field. And this is so important to show the way, show there are other solutions. And actually Solar Impulse is doing that. We are showing that after 1 century of aviation, we can start a new cycle again with no fuel. So of course, to come back to your question, when we fly on this airplane, it flies slowly, it flies only by good weather, because it's the beginning of something else. It's like the Wright brothers 100 years ago, they were also flying alone in their cockpit on good weather. But it's fantastic to open a new way. It's fantastic to fly in a plane that is absolutely unique. It doesn't exist anywhere else. And this gives a fabulous impression when we sit in this cockpit, as much for André as for me.
Can you say a little bit, just for those who maybe haven't read or seen, what is the experience like, the fact that you're actually flying on 100% renewable energy? You don't plug in the Solar Impulse plane in the morning, is that right? It's charged up by the sun and it flies only on the sun.
Absolutely, absolutely. We cannot plug it anywhere. It would ruin the entire experience. So when we take off, we don't need full batteries. We can take off with almost empty batteries, and we climb, and the more we fly, the more energy we have. And in the evening, the batteries are completely full. So either we can spend the night in the air until the next sunrise and continue, or we can land in the evening, and we have enough energy in the batteries to plug our Tesla, or to plug back the energy to our house, to switch on the TV, the refrigerator, the oven, and the lights in the living room. So it's a new way to deal with energy.
Okay, I'm going to check in and see if we have André on the line or not. Do we know if we have André listening in, or is he still busy flying with air traffic control? It sounds like he is not there. Mr. Cameron, you and Bertrand Piccard share some history. As you mentioned, you followed where his father went in the deepest parts of the ocean. Can you say a little bit about just the exploration aspect, beyond sort of the risk, but also just the idea of exploring new ideas and new places, and where a trip to the Mariana Trench takes us as a greater society, you know, in seeing our planet?
Well, I think that the point of building the vehicle and diving it was to draw attention to the fact that there is an entire frontier that's still unexplored right here on planet Earth. If you know, we've begun exploration in the deep ocean, and there are piloted vehicles and unmanned vehicles that can go down typically to 6,000 meters. That's your usual kind of limit, which almost has functioned for many years, almost like the sound barrier for aviation, as being a place beyond which it would require too much energy and too much new engineering to be able to go beyond that. But from 6,000 meters down to 11,000 meters is what they call the Hadal zone, and the Hadal zone comprises, if you add up all these deep trenches all around the world, including the Mariana Trench, but also the Japan Trench, which caused the big tsunami that hit Japan recently, Kermadec Trench, Tonga Trench, and Puerto Rico Trench, and all the others, that totals up to the equivalent of the area of North America. So we have an area the size of a major continent that is as yet completely unexplored. Bertrand's father got a glimpse out the window for a few minutes when he was down there at the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 1960. I got about a 3-hour look around, drove a couple of miles across the bottom last year, and that's about it for human eyes on the subject. And of course, Don Walsh also, when he was there with Jacques Piccard in 1960. That's it for these Hadal depths in terms of human eyes on. So I think, you know, at this point in the 21st century, where you can go on Google Maps, for example, and take a look at almost every square foot of the land surface area of the planet from orbital photographs, it's counterintuitive that there's an area the size of North America that we haven't even looked at yet right here on planet Earth. People tend to think that we're in a post-exploration age. And I think that part of the value, of course, we did a lot of science as we were diving over our dives, but I think the biggest value was symbolic. And I think the biggest value of the Solar Impulse program is symbolic as well, to get us to think in a different way about technology and innovation and how we have to change. And at the risk of running on for a bit, I'd just like to say one other point, and it's riffing on what Bertrand was saying. You know, if you think about aviation up until now, the development is all about going higher, going faster, having bigger aircraft, and that sort of thing. And what the Solar Impulse plane really symbolizes is the change that we have to make as human beings to consume less, to go a little slower, to appreciate the natural world, to consume less energy, to adjust and live harmoniously with our world and with nature and with natural sources of energy that can last forever, not burning up all the oil and coal just as fast as we can and compromising our world in the process with unlimited growth and resource depletion. I mean, obviously, you know, I could go on for hours about that, and I'm sure Bertrand could too as well, but I mean, that's the point of this whole enterprise, isn't it, Bertrand, to have the Solar Impulse stand for something, and what it's really standing for is a change in the way we think as human beings.
I'm sure Bertrand agrees wholeheartedly, huh, Bertrand?
Yes, I agree absolutely, completely. And it's interesting to see that now we have technologies that simultaneously can create jobs and help the industry to make profits, and at the same time protect the environment. And this is new, the clean technologies. This is fantastic, and there's a big hope for these technologies. And maybe James Cameron was too modest also to speak about his technologies. What he used to go to the Mariana Trench is just fantastic. My father did it in 1950 with what was the best 50 years ago. But the bathyscaphe of Jim Cameron would have amazed my father. My father would have loved to see that. I'm sorry he just passed away too early, because he would have loved to see these new technologies that Jim have developed.
Yeah. So one person who's been waiting here patiently is our technology graduate student, Greg Topkin. Greg, I know you're interested in a lot of this technology that's being discussed for renewable energies as well as the risk taking out there. Perhaps, do you have a question for Bertrand Piccard, a little bit about his endeavor and project here?
Yeah, so I'm interested essentially in the idea that there are things to do with technology that we haven't figured out yet. So 5-10 years ago, airplanes were very straightforward. You spent a lot of energy and fuel to get up in the air, spend some time there, and then you landed having burned a lot of fossil fuels. Now, the idea you can use solar power to actually stay airborne indefinitely, or pretty close to indefinitely, is amazing to me. At Cornell Tech, I'm working on various things, one of which is computer vision. The idea that you can have a computer that not only has a camera and it can literally see things, but can actually see conceptually. It can get a video feed and see, oh, there's a person. I know what a person looks like. Or that there is a car, and I can understand how it's traveling and that kind of thing. So the idea that you can take old ideas, getting into the air with an airplane, and approach them in wildly new and powerful ways with technology, that's really powerful to me. So I did actually have a question for you guys. This solar impulse is an amazing way to show that you can do cool things with flight and solar power. And it seems to be working really well. I'm really looking forward to your around-the-world flight in 2015. Let's say it works perfectly. So 3 years from now, we know we have the ability to take a man and fly him basically indefinitely around the globe. What's next? What is a different technology you'd love to use to show we can do a cool thing with this, including solar power and beyond?
Well, it's an excellent question. I believe that once we'll have flown around the world in 2015, if everything goes well, we can really demonstrate that the technologies that we use in solar impulse can be used everywhere. So the goal for us is not necessarily to have an airplane that will transport 2 or 3 people or fly faster or higher. The goal will be to implement these technologies for cars, for trucks, for heating systems, for lighting systems, for construction of houses. Because if all the technologies that we use today were really massively and globally used everywhere, we could already today divide the energy consumption of the world by 2 and produce half of the rest with renewable sources. So this is really what we would like to work on after the flight around the world. Not just to fly for fun, but just to demonstrate how useful it can be for the industry and the quality of life in general on this planet.
Nice. That's really impressive. Looking forward to it.
But what you also have to know is that when you are a pioneer, you have a lot of skeptical people who will laugh at you, who will say it's impossible. They will tell everyone, what these guys are doing is useless. The plane flies slowly. The bathyscaphe takes only 1 person. The electric airplane will never be commercialized, and so on and so on and so on. These people are just people who are prisoners of their certitudes. They are prisoners of their old ways of thinking. And those are poor people. It's really sad for them. So between pioneers, we have to show how passionate we are to get out of the certitudes, to demonstrate that dreams can come true, that passion is contagious, and that more and more people can fulfill their dreams also in their daily life. This is about pioneering, and it's I would say it's the responsibility of the pioneers and the explorers to inspire others to also fulfill their dreams, despite all the ones who are laughing on their side.
Well, I think it's apparent that Bertrand has a little bit of passion behind this idea. I know, ELEW, you were hoping to ask a question or two of our pilots. Unfortunately, we still have André offline. Did you have a question you wanted to direct towards Bertrand as well?
Well, I'm just simply in awe and in full admiration. I totally, as an artist, I'm very emotionally driven or emotionally, centric. And so I just see the emotion that he has for saving the planet, basically, is what I'm hearing. And just these technologies being something that can just spread around the world and just reduce all that carbon and all these things that are destroying, our world. my mind also shoots to the deep future where eventually we can maybe use that technology to visit other planets and get there faster, or be less destructive if we ever go to other places as well. So I'm just really in awe of these gentlemen, basically very inspired, and I related to what he was saying about critics and pessimists and skeptics and people who are naysayers and that sort of thing. But they're doing it, and it's just an amazing thing to behold. Can't wait to see 2015.
But when I learned what you are doing also with music, I really see that pioneering is a state of mind. Whatever we do, we try to invent out of the box new ways to think. And I admire that so much. I met Chuck Berry, the legend of rock and roll, 2 weeks ago in St. Louis. And it's great to meet you today on this Google Hangout and see that there are new legends that are starting. And in some decades, I will say, well, I met him on the Google Hangout, and that's a new legend starting. So congratulations also.
I appreciate that. I was on the TED conference, and I, get to see all of you geniuses do your thing. I remember James Cameron did a line that sticks with me to this day. Every time I go to perform, he said, "Fear is not an option." When I hit the stage, it's like I can succeed, I can fail, but I cannot be afraid, because Cameron said don't. So
Right.
Yeah.
And Erik Lindbergh, I'm curious with all of this talk of what's coming in the future, and something you're passionate about in developing incentive prizes for electric airplanes in the future, and where do you see this road going?
Well, I think it's a fascinating conversation. It's an honor to be here with these people. I think that the big risk that Bertrand did not mention is the risk that we do nothing. And I'll give a shout out to James Cameron and Bertrand and André and all of you that you're pushing your fields, and that's abnormal, unfortunately. The state of our world is that sort of naysayer who sits on the couch eating bonbons and watching television, not in a Google Hangout. I think that we're clearly in an age of barnstorming with electric flight. Everything that I've seen points to the fact that electric propulsion is the propulsion of the future. And I'm imagining what it will be like in 5 years, and indeed in 10 years and 20 years, based on that sort of bell curve between the Wright brothers, the barnstorming age of the 1920s, and my grandfather's flight in 1927 across the Atlantic. I like to say that before he made his flight from New York to Paris solo in 1927, people who flew in airplanes were called barnstormers and daredevils and flying fools. And after he flew across the Atlantic, people who flew in airplanes were called pilots and passengers. And that's this shift in perspective that the world gained by that flight. And I think that we now have a $300 billion aviation industry that transports all of us and all of our packages and goods and things around the world. We need to make that more efficient. And this industry promises that. So I can't wait to see what's going to happen when we have that first transatlantic flight. In fact, I think we need to put up a prize for it. We need to have a competition. The first $10 million prize to fly from New York to Paris in a practical aircraft that carries passengers, that shows the world that this could be a practical technology, because it's right there. We just need to realize it.
Yeah, you are right. You are completely right, Erik. And, actually I met your grandfather when I was a child, and that changed my life. Because until that moment, I was just reading books about him, about the conquest of space and conquest of the air. And when I met your grandfather, I saw it was a reality. And this is what people have to understand. It's not only about dreaming. It's clearly about making our dreams a reality. And the pioneers are the ones who do it.
And to wrap this up, James Cameron, as a pilot who flies underwater quite a bit. I was curious if you had any questions for those who are pioneering these flights above the water and in the sky.
Well, I have an unfair advantage because Bertrand and I are friends, so I can geek out and ask him all the details of, how he's managing his power systems and what kinds of batteries he's using and all that thing, and I'd be happy to do that offline. I think it might be fun if Bertrand shared with us a little bit of the experience of being in the aircraft in such a tiny cockpit for such a long period of time, because I can certainly relate to that. But since I'm probably not going to cycle back into the conversation, I'd just like to make a point. It certainly makes sense for me to be on this because I'm friends with Bertrand, because part of what I did in our dive recently was to celebrate the pioneering work of his father and Don Walsh and his grandfather who designed the bathyscaphe and so on. So it's logical for me to be here. It's logical for Erik to be here with the pioneering work of his grandfather. It's less obvious for why ELEW is here, but not to me, because I think this is about the fact that people tend to divide us arbitrarily into artists and scientists and technologists, as if art and technology are two different things that can only be in the mind of a different person. The same person can't hold both. But I work as a filmmaker, as an artist, and I work with the most advanced technology out there, the most advanced software and so on. So for me, doing something like designing and building a submarine was not that much different than my day job as a filmmaker, making movies like Avatar, which involves a tremendous amount of engineering. And so I celebrate the fact that in organizing this hangout, you guys included ELEW in this. And thanks for your comments, ELEW. That's awesome. Your perspective on it. But I think that another thing that ELEW said that reminded me. I always like to say fear is not an option, and that's kind of a little bit of a way of bracing oneself for the unknown. But the other thing that I usually say on my expeditions when I'm starting them out, and I'm telling the engineers to be very, very prepared, is that hope is not a strategy. Don't just hope your stuff is going to work. Make sure it's going to work. Test it over and over and over, because the ocean is an extremely unforgiving environment. But what we're really talking about here is all about hope. As I'm a parent, I've got 5 kids. I'm hoping for a better world. My intellectual mind, with everything that I've read, tells me that it's going to be a very different world, and probably a very unpleasant world for an awful lot of people, because of the rate at which we're using up our resources, we're depleting the natural world, we're depleting biodiversity and so on. But we have to have hope in our hearts, and hope that our imagination and our innovation is going to provide some answers. We can't all go back and live in the garden. It's too late for that. We can't keep going on the way we're going. So we're forging new territory. We're all pioneers. Everybody on planet Earth is a pioneer right now in a big experiment where we're experimenting with our own life support system. And I think it's important for people like us that are people of conscience to grab the controls back away from the people that have been holding on to the controls with a deathly grip for a long time, that are ready to fly us right into a mountain. Because that's what's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But as a parent, it's my job to have hope. And so, and I know that we're all on this call because we all are people of conscience and all believe that these things are possible and within the scope of the human spirit.
Well, thanks for that message. And perhaps on that note, Bertrand, could you talk a little bit about what's coming up next, and maybe touch a little bit on that initial question of what it's like and what the plan is for the next flight around the world, and what you're looking forward to there?
Okay, the first thing I would like to say is that André is not physically in these hangouts because of his need to speak to the air traffic controllers, but everything I say represents also what André says. We are not only partners and leaders of this project, we're also friends, very close friends since 10 years, and we share the same passion. So every word I was saying comes also from him, although he is not here into this hangout. So to come back to your question, yes, there is a second airplane now under construction. This airplane is a little bit bigger, it has more performance, it will take more batteries. It will also have an autopilot. There will be toilets in the seat. The seat can lie flat, so it will be like a good business class seat. And the second airplane will be able to fly around the world with legs of 4 to 6 days. So for example, the Pacific, that will be 6 days for the pilot alone. And André and I, we will swap in the cockpit at each stopover. And each stopover is very important also, maybe even more than the flight, because each stopover is the possibility to meet political leaders, key opinion leaders, students in universities, and really to inspire them and to involve them very actively into the promotion of these clean technologies that the world so badly needs. So you see that there is always this pioneering spirit, but we try to make it as contagious as possible, so more and more people will be with us. Already today, we have 40,000 people on a memory stick traveling with André from Washington to New York, and we hope to have even much more to show that there is a popular movement in favor of these new technologies and that the politicians are obliged to really listen to their voices.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for joining us on this Google Hangout today, including co-founder, Solar Impulse co-founder and pilot Bertrand Piccard, André Borschberg, musician ELEW, pilot and entrepreneur Erik Lindbergh, student Greg Topkin, and filmmaker and deep sea submersible driver James Cameron. Thank you all for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye to all. Thank you.
Breathe deep, fly high.
Yeah.